Hi, my name is Natalie,
And my name is James.
and this is our presentation on some indicators of youth aggression, specifically depression and substance use. So there are a few different factors that may be predictors of youth aggression. Previous literature has found that mood disorders categorized by emotional dysregulation may be co-current with reactive aggression, and drug and alcohol use has also been found to be a predictor of aggression. So through our research, we want to study these factors and compare them as predictors. Our question is, which is a stronger predictor of youth aggression, depression or substance use? We will also be moderating these variables by gender to see if the results differ between boys and girls. Studying this subject can give us insight into the basis of aggression in youth, and in turn will help us prevent youth aggression. This will also help us understand the different outlets that adolescents turn to when they're struggling with their mental health. This study can also help us see if aggression is exacerbated by substance use.
Turning to the characters that we looked at specifically in our study, starting with adolescence. Adolescence can be defined as the period marking the transition from childhood to adulthood, typically spanning from about 15 years old to 17 years old, and roughly corresponding from the onset of puberty. We also specifically chose around this age for our statistical analysis, given that though individuals at this age are technically still considered adolescents, they are, for the most part, old enough to the point where they likely have encountered or have access to substances. Aggression can be defined as a behavior that aims to harm or injure another person. For depression, we chose to look at the self-reported depression symptomology listed in the AddHealth codebook as a sort of proxy for actual clinical diagnosis for depression. For substance use, we also looked at self-reported use across various listings in the AddHealth codebook with a severity grading from low to high substance use. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, boys are more likely to be engaged in violence and violent crimes, including homicide, than girls are. But this isn't necessarily because girls are engaging in less violence, but rather because they are engaging in less aggression than boys. So they're still engaging in violence, but simply non-violent, non-direct forms of aggression. So our hypothesis for our study is that depressive symptomology in general will be a more significant indicator of aggression than substance use will, and that boys reporting depressive symptoms will be more likely to have engaged in physical aggression than girls due to comparatively less emotional outlets, and that boys using substances will be more likely to have engaged in physical aggression in comparison to girls for the same reasons. We used the first wave of the AddHealth data set collected in 1984. It's a stratified sample of high schools across all of the United States with oversampling of specific populations to ensure statistic significance. This is our demographics, majority white, majority 15 to 17, again, targeting that specific demographic. This is just more of our demographics, a pretty even split between boys and girls.
Our first independent variable is depression. We will not be using a diagnosis of depression for this study. Instead, we are looking at depressive symptoms found in the AddHealth feelings section, as mentioned in our introduction. These items were ranked on a scale from 0 to 3 for how often the individual felt this specific way, 0 being never or rarely, while 3 is most of the time or all of the time. We then averaged these values to give us a linear variable depression. This graph is rather right skewed with a mean of 0.6 for depression. Most of our sample had pretty low depression. We then divided the range into 3 to split our means into 3 categories, being low, medium, and high depression. So as you can see from the graph on the right, 78% of our sample had low depression, about 20% had medium depression, and only 1.3% had high depression.
For substance use, we measured self-reported substance use based on a low, medium, high, low to high severity rating scale with 3 separate sub-measuring sections, one for tobacco use, one for alcohol use, and one for other illicit drug use. This is what our substance use linear variable looks like here on the left. As you can see, it's pretty normally distributed with our mean and median being about 2.5. We then took this linear variable and turned it into a categorical variable. in order to give us the low, medium, and high substance use severity ratings.
Finally, our dependent variable is direct aggression. For the sake of our study, we only looked at acts of violence that were instigated by the respondent. So we removed any threats, gang fights, respondent getting jumped, etc. We took most of our items from the AddHealth delinquency and fighting and violence sections, with one item from the tobacco, alcohol, and drugs section. The graph on the left is a histogram of the average scores responders gave. The responses had a mean of 0.25. The majority of the individuals responded 0. We recoded these responses into a categorical variable, where 0 represented never being in a fight, so responding 0 to every question. Anything above that, or responding 1 to at least one question, represented having been in a fight. This breakdown showed that 57% of our sample had not been in a fight in the past year or so, while 42.9% had. First, we ran a Pearson chi-square to determine if physical aggression in adolescence varies by depressive feelings. We found that it does, with people showing mid to high depression being more aggressive than expected. Graphing our results showed that 60.4% of people with low depression did not show aggression, but 53.7% of people with mid depression showed aggression, and 73.5% of the people with high depression showed aggression. When moderated by gender, we found the same results, that people with mid to high depression were more aggressive than expected in both genders. However, more boys with low depression fought, and more girls with mid depression did not fight, despite those values being less than and more than their expected values, respectively. We can understand this further when we look at the graphs. When looking at the boys' aggression graph, we can see that boys with low depression fought the most, but this value was still less than the expected value for that category. The same goes for girls with medium depression in the graph on the right. Although more girls with mid depression did not fight, the value is still less than the expected number of girls with medium depression who did not fight. This acts as evidence to the point that boys fight more than girls, which is concurrent with the previous literature.
In order to determine if adolescents' reports of physical aggression varied by their self-reported amount of substance use, we ran a chi-squared analysis and found that there is a significant interaction between physical aggression and severity of substance use, where individuals who have reported both high and low substance use reported more physical aggression than expected, while individuals with only medium scores reported less physical aggression than actually expected. For our low substance use, you can see that around 54% fought, which is statistically higher than expected, while 45.6 did not, which is less than expected. And for medium substance use, 32% of people fought, which is much, much less than expected, while 67.3 did not, which is much more than expected. For the high substance use, you can see the same kind of trend as with the low substance use, where more people fought than expected, but not to the degree of significance shown in the medium substance use category. And the same applies to the did not fight, but with less than expected. When we moderated this by gender, we ran 2 more chi-squared analyses, 1 per biological sex, and found that the trend was the same for both sexes, where high or low substance use reports were more likely to be engaged in physical violence, and medium reports were less likely. But there was an interesting distinction between the genders, where overall boys were much more likely to engage in physical violence proportional to their substance use when compared to girls. This is in line with all of the previous literature that we've read and discussed, which has found that overall boys are more likely to engage in direct aggression. You can see just how distinct the gender difference is, with boys on the left overall just being much, much more likely to fight than girls, whose graph is on the right. But overall, you can see the same kind of trends, with high-low being higher and then medium being lower. Out of substance use and depression, which one is actually better or more significant when it comes to predicting aggression? In order to determine this, we ran a linear regression analysis. And we found that while they were both actually statistically significant indicators of adolescent aggression, depression was in fact more strongly correlated with aggression than substance use. As you can see, there is a more severe association with aggression and depression, while the one for aggression and substance use is only negative, different valence, 0.081. And again, you can see this same kind of trend where boys are overall more likely to be aggressive and girls overall are less likely to be aggressive.
Throughout our research, we wanted to find out if between depression and substance use, which was a more significant predictor of youth likelihood to engage in physical aggression. We wanted to research this to see if we could find insight into the basis of aggression in adolescents and to see if increased aggression can be associated with depressive symptoms and/or substance use in a way similar to other mood disorders. What we found was that within our sample, adolescents with medium to high depressive symptoms are more likely to engage in physical violence with no gender difference. Within our sample, we also found that adolescents with low to high substance use are more likely to engage in physical violence, this time with a distinct gender difference. We found that depressive symptomology was a more significant predictor of youth violence. The results we found were congruent with the previous literature that stated that mood disorders are often concurrent with increased reactive aggression in adolescents, as well as the research that stated that alcohol consumption and drug use can also be predictors of aggression.
Our study was relatively limited in a lot of different ways, which somewhat limits the applicability of our findings. To remedy this, we suggest further refining our coded definitions of what aggression and substance use should be categorized as to limit any potential confounding variables, namely confusion surrounding what exactly constitute a fight or altercation. Another limitation is that this was only a cross-sectional study. So we think that a longitudinal study of the same topic could potentially provide better insight into the association between worsening depression, substance use, and aggression. Adolescents tend to look for outlets wherever they can when struggling with their mental health. And especially in today's day and age, treatment can kind of be hard to come by. And a common external outlet that they may turn to can be physical aggression. And adolescents can also turn to using substance use for a variety of reasons. And this is something that may also increase aggression. Hopefully, by providing better access to mental health resources and treatment, we may be able to decrease both substance use and depressive symptoms, and as a proxy, decrease physical aggression in youth, overall improving their standard of living.